Paul Donovan never begged. But when Bickey's men beat him bloody on the cold concrete floor of their hideout, when they cracked his ribs and split his lip wide open, he thought about it. Not for himself. For Isabel. He had walked into this gang knowing they would break him. Knowing they would humiliate him, starve him, test him in ways no man should ever be tested. They stripped him of his dignity, made him sleep in the filth with the rats, forced him to do the kind of grunt work that would send most men running. Because Paul was an ex-cop. And Bickey fucking hated cops. When the time came for Bickey to put a bullet in his head, he stopped. Paul saw the change in his eyes, that flicker of recognition. The same hate. "You're just like me," Bickey had murmured. "You just don't know it yet." So the beatings continued. The tests continued. Paul spent years proving himself, clawing his way through the ranks of men who would have happily gutted him just for wearing a badge once. 3 times he was stabbed, once in the thigh, once in the ribs, and once in the shoulder. But he kept fighting. And Bickey saw something in him. By the 4th year, Paul wasn't just another soldier in the gang. He was something more. Something worse. And that's when Bickey gave him his final test. Manu had been tied to a chair in the middle of an abandoned warehouse. His legs were shattered, bones jutting out from beneath his skin, his screams still lingering in the air. Blood pooled beneath him, glistening under the flickering lights. Paul stood in the doorway, silent. The gang had recreated Isabel's last moments, down to the finest detail. The doorway, the lighting, the laughter. Manu was the one pleading now. "Paul, please, you don't have to do this." Paul said nothing. Bickey circled Manu like a predator, lighting a cigarette. "This piece of shit ordered your girl dead. Just like that. Flicked her off the map like she was nothing." Manu sobbed, shaking his head. "I didn't have a choice. She knew about the narcotics." Paul's gaze snapped to him. "The narcotics?" Manu swallowed thickly. "Internal affairs, we sell to dealers. We keep things balanced." One of the officers let it slip in a session, and Isabel wouldn't let it go. She had to be silenced. The gang howled with laughter, mirroring the way the cops had laughed before they executed Isabel. Paul could see it, frame by frame, like a reel of film playing behind his eyes. Isabel's fear. The way she had whispered "I can't" before the gunshot. And now, Manu sat before him. Broken. Weak. Pleading. Bickey leaned in close, his cigarette dangling between his fingers. "You want this, don't you?" Paul didn't answer. Bickey grinned. "Then do it, but don't make it quick." Paul had killed before. But this wasn't just about vengeance. This was an exorcism. He grabbed the blade from the table, rusted, jagged, meant for tearing flesh rather than cutting. Manu's eyes widened in sheer horror. "Paul, please." The first cut was deep. Across the cheek, the same place where Isabel's head had snapped back when the bullet entered. Manu screamed. The second was slower. He dragged the blade down Manu's chest, peeling skin away, carving him up like a butcher with his prize. The gang cheered. Paul didn't hear them. His world had narrowed down to this moment. This man, this revenge. Manu wailed, body jerking in agony. His blood painted the floor, thick and dark. Paul could see the way his muscles twitched, his nerves firing off panic signals that his brain couldn't keep up with. "You think she begged like this?" Paul murmured. "You think she screamed this much?" Manu sobbed, his face a grotesque mess of tears, snot, and blood. I'm sorry. Paul plunged the knife into his stomach and twisted. The gang roared. Manu gurgled, his body convulsing, blood spilling from his lips. Paul leaned in, his voice eerily soft. "You told her to take a step outside. I think you should do the same." He grabbed Manu by the collar, dragging him toward the warehouse's open door. Manu's breath hitched, his pain momentarily forgotten as he stared at the open air beyond. Paul yanked him forward. Manu's screams filled the night as Paul flung him down the concrete steps. His broken legs crunched on impact. His body spasmed violently as he choked on his own blood. Paul descended the steps slowly, methodically. Manu barely had any life left in him, his breath coming in wet gasps. Paul crouched beside him. "No one's going to remember you," he whispered. And then, with the slow, cruel precision of a man who had already stepped beyond morality, he pressed his boot against Manu's throat. He applied pressure. Manu thrashed weakly. Then, finally, he stilled. Dead. Paul exhaled. The gang erupted into cheers, their voices merging into a chaotic symphony of triumph. Bicky clapped Paul on the back, grinning like a proud father. "You did good, brother." Paul didn't respond. Because deep down, he knew, there was no going back. He had left that ship a long time ago.